Madam President, just over a week ago, Senator Harris and myself, with partnership and support of many of the Democrats in the Senate and our Senate leadership, Chuck Schumer, along with colleagues in the House, our Congressional Black Caucus, and over 250 partners throughout the two chambers, introduced the Justice in Policing Act, a bill designed to take concrete steps to bring long overdue, long called for, much needed real accountability and transparency and oversight to policing in America. We introduced the bill in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. Law enforcement officers in Minneapolis, along with what happened with Breonna Taylor in her home in Louisville, the killings of other Americans, names who are now known for the wretched, awful way in which they died. Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, so many others, and so many others whose names we do not know, all part of a system that does not reflect our common values, does not reflect the highest ideals of this nation. In fact, just the opposite. It reflects the darkness of our past and our present. It reflects racism and bigotry and not equal justice under the law. We are at a point in American history that is a crossroads, where millions of Americans, all 50 states, are engaging in some types of action of protest, whether it's on social media platforms or in the middle of a pandemic out in the streets. And the choice we have right now before us as this body is in the face of Americans from all backgrounds, races, religions, and parties are calling for reform. What will this body do? Now, a lot of folks want to reduce the approaches that are coming forward as a Republican or a Democratic approach. Well, I'm telling you right now, this is not a choice between one side of an aisle or another. It is a choice between meaningful reforms in this moment or making symbolic gestures that will do nothing to save people's lives. It's a choice between action and inaction. The bill that we are proposing is not new. These are reforms that have been put in place in some cities and some states. This is a real effort to hold policing in America accountable for egregious behavior. It'll create transparency, as sunlight is the best disinfectant to injustice, and it'll also bring about an end to policies and practices that should be ended in our country, that have been called for by President Bush in his first address to Congress, an end to racial and religious profiling. We see, in fact, some of the more so-called controversial elements of this bill, like qualified immunity, that conservatives and Democrats on both sides of the aisle, folks from the Cato Institute, from Clarence Thomas, you see conservative organization after conservative organization say the obvious, that no one should be shielded from accountability when they are violating the civil rights of another American. We have a bill that calls for change that will protect lives and practices that have killed Americans, create accountability and transparency into departments, and make sure that no one in our country is above the law. This is not a time for half steps and half measures. It is not a time to nibble around the edges. It's not a time to find the lowest common denominator. It's not a time where so many Americans feel a metaphorical knee on the neck of justice, for us to pull our knee halfway off of that neck and call it progress. No, this is a time for us to do what is right and necessary to end the kind of violence and murder and unaccountability that we see that is too endemic in our nation. And so this is the truth. The measures in this bill will pass. Congress will one day get this right. The provisions in Justice Policing Act, I'm confident that one day in this country we will ban religious and racial profiling. I am confident that one day in this country we will ban chokeholds. I am confident that one day in this country we will have a national registry of police misconduct, of police use of force. I am confident that one day no one who murders someone in broad daylight in front of cameras will be shielded from accountability on the federal level in our civil courts or in our criminal courts by impossible standards to meet. It is clear that one day we shall overcome what is now injustice, that this body will do the right thing. There will be a time in America where mental health issues will be treated with health care and not police and prisons. There will be a time in America that addiction will be treated with treatment and not police and prisons. There'll be a time in America that the fragile within our society won't be further hurt and harmed by practices and prisons, but will be elevated and cared for. I know this time is coming. But I believe that the time is now, that justice delayed is justice denied. If we do not act and claim this moment, this time, then we as a country are going to find ourselves here again. In my short life, I have seen decades of this. I was born right after the Kerner Report, calling out these practices, demanding reforms. In that time, I watched Rodney King get beaten and officers who did it be held unaccountable for their actions. This cycle is continuing in our country every day. There are so many cases that we don't see because we don't have transparency. They explode into the national consciousness when someone catches on videotape what we know is wrong, but we have not taken the measures to stop it. Now is the time that we must act and not find ourselves here a month from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, watching this awful cycle play over and over again. Listen to the American people, all 50 states, all backgrounds, joining together in a chorus of conviction to put a stop to this nightmare. Now is the time. No hash measures, no half steps, no diluted attempts, no fainting towards what should be done, but not having the courage to boldly go in the direction that one day will pass, but I believe one day should be today. Congress should act. I am so proud that I'm not alone in this position. I'm so proud that there are others in this body that are joining with me with the same sense of urgency to get broad-based reform done. And I see my colleague from Oregon, one of the many champions for justice in this body. And I'm grateful now to yield to him.